It's a rainy autumn afternoon and the leaves on the trees are turning. It's a perfect afternoon to cuddle up with a warm cup of tea and talk about books. So today I'm going to do the fall edition of If You Like This Book, Then I Think You Will Like That Book. And the goal here is basically I'm going to have a comparison between an adult or a more adult themed adult content version of a book. If you liked that, you would like a more tame, maybe middle grade book, so that you kind of have the two extremes, but there is a connection between the two of them. And in this video, I am recommending books that I have read, not any that are on a TBR. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern is a fantasy novel, and the premise is that there is this circus, it is called Le Cirque des Rêves, that shows up in a town overnight. There are all kinds of magic that is happening. Most of the attendees of the circus think that it's just tricks, when in reality it is real magic that's happening. There are two main characters, it's Celia and Marco. They are both skilled magicians, and what is going on between them is that they are pawns in a fierce competition between two very powerful magicians. And basically, when one of the sides wins, the other side will be destroyed. And as you continue through, Celia and Marco realize that they really don't want the other side to be destroyed. They really don't want to be pawns in these two magicians' competition. And so they have to figure out how to resolve this without so much destruction. So I loved this book so much. And so when I heard about the Nowhere Emporium, I thought immediately of the Night Circus. And so if you liked the Night Circus, I would recommend reading the Nowhere Emporium. It is a middle grade novel, and the premise is that there is this shop front that once you go in and explore it and see the magic, by the time you leave, you can't remember what happened in the Emporium. But one day in Scotland, I think it's Glasgow, a boy named Danny stumbles into the Emporium because he's being chased by bullies from his orphanage. He meets Mr. Silver, who is the proprietor of this Emporium, and Mr. Silver helps him, and then Danny is on his way back to the orphanage. Where we end up with a kink in this is that Danny the next day shows up again and he remembers Mr. Silver, and Mr. Silver is flummoxed by this. He doesn't understand how Danny can remember being there when nobody else does. And so he eventually agrees to take Danny on as an apprentice. But as Danny gets further into the workings of the Emporium, he realizes that there is a fierce competition between two very strong magicians, and he is and the Emporium are caught in the middle between these two fierce magicians, and Danny has to unravel what is going on again to save the Emporium and not have a lot of destruction. So if you love the idea of a magical entity just showing up in various locations, if you love the idea of a magician competition, if you love the idea of characters that are central to the plot, really wanting to dedicate themselves and sacrifice themselves for the betterment of this magical entity, whether it is a circus or an emporium, then you will love either of these books. From Dust Returned by Ray Bradbury. I love this book so much. Ray Bradbury is a science fiction fantasy writer. This is the story of the Eternal Family. It is a whole big mix-up of different characters. So there's a shapeshifter, telepath, vampires. There's like this old Egyptian creature that kind of stays in its coffin. And there's also Timothy, who is a human boy. They do this celebration that is a homecoming type celebration, but it's all kind of tinged with this idea of things seem to be ending and changing. And so they're having all of these creatures gather into this one place, but it seems like they're on the edge of change and possibly death and decay and ending of everything. And so I think a natural progression for this would be The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, which is a really great book. But I chose Wildwood Dancing by Juliette Marillier. This is one of my favorite books ever. It is the retelling of the 12 dancing sisters fairy tale. So it is set in Transylvania. Jenna is the main character, although she is not the oldest sister. She is kind of the one who seems to keep everyone together. Well, her father falls ill and ends up having to leave to go for like rehab to get better. And she has a cousin come to stay, and her cousin is really kind of evil. And so it starts to feel like things are changing. They don't have the life that they had when their father was there. This cousin is very overbearing, and it just feels like, you know, where are we going to end up going? Well, the girls discover a way across a lake into this other world where every full moon, all of these different creatures gather together and they dance. And the girls dance so much that they're going through their slippers. It turns out that Jenna's older sister ends up falling in love with one of these creatures from the other world. And there is a threat of vampires because there are things happening kind of out in fields around these gatherings. And there just starts to be this building of peril at home with this cousin ruling the castle that Jenna and her sisters are in, as well as danger at these other world dancings. They've always felt safe, but something is kind of changing there and it's starting to really kind of feel unsafe. There's also this mystery that goes throughout that is connected that Jenna is trying to figure out as well. If you like this idea of different kinds of creatures all coming together for these celebrations, whether it's annual or in the full moon, if you like the idea of characters really kind of facing the end of what they have known and knowing that kind of getting together at these events brings danger in and of itself, then either one of these reads would be good for you. Again, this is probably a little bit closer on the YA side. I don't remember anything really inappropriate in here, but it's definitely older middle grade level. Like I said, it's one of my favorite. These both are two of my favorite books. The Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow is the story of three sisters, James Juniper, Agnes Amaranth, and Beatrice Belladonna. And they kind of had this like split that happened early on in their teenage years. And yet they end up coming back together again. And there is ancient prophecies that are related to the sisters. Witches are very much banned in their area. I feel like they're in Salem, if I remember correctly, but they decide that they are tired of being controlled and that they really want more freedom. Other women in the community want more freedom, and so they sort of unwillingly, but they do band together to basically overthrow the establishment. There is a same-sex relationship in here. It's very well done in my opinion, but I did want to mention that. It definitely deals with kind of the gritty parts of being a female during a time when females were not necessarily respected or appreciated. A Pinch of Magic by Michelle Harrison is the story of the Wittershins sisters. It is Betty, Fliss, and Charlie. We discover pretty much at the beginning that there is a family curse and the girls need to band together and work together to try to figure out why the curse happened and how to erase that curse. And I mean, the cover is just so, I love this cover so much. So these two are very similar in obviously the three sisters that need to band together to be able to try to take down the system and to be able to erase the curse. This is much more of an adult-themed adult content book. This one is just a nice read that is so great for your solid middle grade level. So I've got Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. I think most people know what this is about. So this is the story of Maxim de Winter's second wife, who goes to live in Manderley, and when she arrives there, Mrs. Danvers, who's the housekeeper, really starts to plant these seeds of doubts that Maxim de Winter's first wife, Rebecca, was much better. And Mrs. Maxim de Winter II starts to question and wonder what happened to the first wife, and there's a lot of creepiness in this book. I wanted to recommend The Mystery of the Witch's Bridge. This is by Barbie Oliver Carleton. This is not a book you're going to hear a lot about, I don't think. I don't ever see this anywhere, but it is a book that I read when I was younger, and it's so creepy to read, but definitely a solid middle grade. I mean, it's not, there's not a lot of horror. It's really a lot of mental games that you're playing. So the back says, evil haunts the Witch's Bridge, the foggy marshes, the old Pride house. Now young Dan Pride has come to live there. Can he escape the terror that hangs over Witch's Bridge? That night, Dan sees a weird light flickering out on the marsh. D-A-N, the light spells out in code. Dan Pride. So if you like the arrival of a new character to a creepy old manor and the seeds being planted that there is a ghost and that there is supernatural activity going on that is targeting you, you will love either one of these books. So I'm going to do this one backwards a little bit. This is Emily of New Moon. This is by L.M. Montgomery, and it is the story of Emily, and she becomes an orphan and goes and lives with her family. I love Emily of New Moon. I don't want to give too much away on why I've connected the two of these books. So I will say Emily is a very strong-willed character, so she starts out maybe being a little bit more malleable than she ends up. She kind of develops into like herself, and there is a mystery with some supernatural sprinklings in there. Just a really phenomenal middle grade read to experience in the fall. And if you like Emily of New Moon or the idea of it, then I would recommend The Middle Window by Elizabeth Goudge. I love Elizabeth Goudge. I am slowly making my way through her works, and this is the story of Judy Cameron. She and her fiance and her parents all decide to leave London, and they are going to the Scottish Highlands. She really has a change, very similar. She starts out kind of malleable, but man, she really grows a backbone as this book continues. And it says the Highlands of Scotland and Skye provide the background for the romantic story of three people so linked together that time is powerless to separate them. Her fiance and parents end up being really kind of disturbed by the changes that Judy is experiencing. And again, there is this supernatural sprinkling. And I just love the classic nature of both of these, but the bringing in of idea that things are not always as they appear, and unraveling of years-long mysteries, centuries-long mystery. Both of these are phenomenal. Two of my favorites. Do I say that a lot? The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. I think I originally thought that this was a middle grade book. It's so pretty. Oh, and when I read it and when I got into it, I was like, whoa, this is not a middle grade book. I even like went back and looked at the age and I was like, this doesn't say it's a middle grade book. It is not. It might be YA, but it is so, this is like very much a horror novel to me. So the idea here is that Alice Prosper Pine has always been with her mother, and they've always been on the road. They've always been kind of like moving. Alice's grandmother is a famous writer, and she has written the tales of Hazelwood, which is basically fairy tales, but with a really dark bent. And she's this recluse. Nobody is able to get in or out. There are people who have tried to go and visit her, and there's like maybe one that has been able to get out, but they're all messed up mentally. And her mother, Alice's mother, does not want her to have anything to do with her grandmother. Well, her grandmother dies. They get a letter that says her grandmother has died, and then her mother goes missing. And so Alice has to go on this quest to try to figure out where her mother is, and it kind of leads her to her grandmother and this legend that her grandmother actually left the world that we know to go into Hazelwood, and that there's this like other world out there that the grandmother has been to, and Alice with a friend has to figure out where her mother is and what happened. And it is a crazy story. I still can't decide whether I really like it that much. I just know if you're looking for a mind trip and horror, the Hazelwood is definitely a good option for that. But if you want something that is a little bit more palatable and not so creepy and disturbing, Wildwood is a great option. It is definitely a chunker. This is the story of Prue McKeel. Her brother suddenly gets taken by a crow and goes across this land. I think they're in Portland. There's better be a map. There's gotta be a map. Yes, there's a map. They're in Portland, and then there's like this river, and then her brother gets taken to this land that impassable wilderness is what it is. And she goes against what her parents say, and she goes out after finding him. And it's a similar thing of there's creatures that are fighting, there are wolves that are warriors, there's some of the creatures are fighting for their freedom. So if you like the idea of creatures that are part of stories fighting for their freedom and wanting their own autonomy and independence, if you like the idea of kind of this other world that a character goes into and tries to unravel why they specifically are connected into that world, then these are two really great books. And again, this one is a solid middle grade. This one is not. In the Company of Witches by R. Lee Wallace is the story of Bryn Warren. She lives with her two aunts and uncle, and they are part of the Warren family. They live in this really small town of Evanfall, and they run a bed and breakfast. So one aunt is a kitchen witch, another aunt is a garden witch, but Bryn has lost her powers since the death of her husband. And she kind of does these half-hearted attempts, but she really kind of has given up on it. She feels let down by magic. It didn't help her when her husband was dying, and so I think there's some resentment there. But right at the beginning, a unlikable patron, Constance Graves, is found dead in her room. And there seems to be some foul play. And so throughout the book, Bryn is really kind of being a detective and trying to figure out how Constance Graves died. It is very much a cozy read. I even tabbed a couple places where it just really felt that autumnal aesthetic, and so it's a really cute read. It's pretty new, and again, I think it's getting pretty good traction. It was published in 2021. So if In the Company of Witches sounds like something that you would be interested in, then I would recommend The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. This is a whole series, and in fact, Netflix has the show. It's a TV show, and from what I've seen of it, it's pretty wholesome and cute, and doesn't get too weird or odd like it can sometimes as the seasons progress, because it has so many books to follow. So I would recommend the Netflix show too. But the premise here is that Mildred Hubble is a student, a pupil at an academy, Miss Cackle's academy, and she really is not very skilled. She can't control her broomstick. She's made an enemy out of one of the girls. There's always has to be that conflict. Ethel, I think the character was named. And she's just really struggling through. Also, Mildred is always trying to solve a mystery. So, she overhears out in the woods some nefarious plans being made, and it looks like Miss Cackle, and so she has to figure out, is that someone she can trust, or why does this other person look like her? And so if you like the idea of a witch who's really struggling with her powers and isn't able to control it, and this underlying thread of mystery as they're both trying to develop their magical skills or try to figure out if it's worth it. So I think either In the Company of Good Witches or the middle grade version of The Worst Witch would be two really great cozy options. The Dark Witch by Nora Roberts is actually the first in a trilogy. It is called the Cousins O'Dwyer trilogy. It is set in Ireland, which is a fabulously cozy witch story to be set in. It is also a love story. I don't remember it being super spicy, but there definitely is physical involvement in this book, in all three of them really. So Iona is our main character. She has come from the United States to find her relatives because there is a magical connection between her and then a sibling set in Ireland, and they're all kind of in their late 20s, early 30s, I think. So she arrives, she's really not skilled with her magic, whereas the two siblings in Ireland are, and they agree to teach her. And what she comes to find out is that Sorsha, which is a very ancient female ancestor in their family, was targeted by a very evil force and ended up sacrificing herself for the sake of her children and hence her descendants. And the hope was that she had destroyed this evil force, but it turns out that she actually didn't. And so this evil force is now building strength again, and the plan that it has is to come after these three magical beings that have come through Sorsha's lineage. I will say, because it's a trilogy, it doesn't resolve immediately in that first book. I still think it's a good read to just read that one book, and you can decide if you want to read the other two. I very much preferred the first book, and I liked the love story in the first book much better than the other two. Definitely the second one. The third one, the love story was interesting, but the second one kind of languished for me. If you like The Dark Witch, then I think you will like The Night Gardener by Jonathan Auxier. So this follows two Irish siblings, and they have come into a bad situation, and they are going to a manor to work as servants. And there's a strange family that is living there, and there is a lot of creepy occurrences that go on in this house and in this property. They slowly unravel the clues to realize that there is an ancient curse and an evil force at work on this property that they have come to work at. I will say, I've read all of Jonathan Auxier's books, and The Night Gardener is by far the creepiest. So it's not one that I would hand over to a kind of young middle grade. I definitely would push that up to your older middle grade reader. But if you love the Irish sibling set magic trope, if you love the ancient curse coming back to haunt and terrorize modern day descendants and characters, then either The Dark Witch or The Night Gardener are both really great options for you. Thanks so much for watching. Please feel free to leave below some of your ideas of any of the kind of books where I shared, if you like this, then you would like that. If you can think of other ones that would fit into those categories or even your own ideas, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until next time.